Banish AI, incorporating AI into writing pedagogy. I want to note that we have the English departments of both campuses represented here today. Our focus is definitely going to be writing pedagogy, but I think there's lots of applications to research and other fields as well. And I hope we're going to have a good conversation today. And in that spirit, to get us started, uh, each of us is going to talk a little bit about why we're interested in AI and when we first kind of realized this was going to be impactful for our classrooms. But we would invite everyone here to share your responses or whatever you're comfortable sharing in response to these questions in the chat. And I'll start off. So I think I know everyone in the room and probably a good number of the folks watching, but my name's Christian Aguiar. I'm associate professor of English at the community college. And for me, the moment that really made me realize AI was going to be impactful in writing was the summer of 2023. Before we were having too many conversations about it at UDC, I was teaching a summer program at Georgetown. We had some graduate students, and you could see the humanities folks were engaging with this in one way, but I'll always remember I had a med student from Howard who told us point blank he and his classmates were using AI to do everything. And he very jokingly said, "You guys better take care of your health because I don't know that we're learning what we need to." And we all laughed about it, but we are indeed seeing some impacts on learning. So that was the moment when I knew this was going to be a thing. As I better kick this over to someone.
Thank you. So my name is Ingrid Garcia. I'm an adjunct assistant professor at UDC, and I've always been the type of person that kind of doesn't follow the trends until I absolutely have no other choice. So a good example of that was Game of Thrones. Everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, this is a great show." And I was like, "What?" And it wasn't, they were probably in season 3 when I was like, "Oh, this is actually pretty good." So similar thing happened with AI. People started mentioning it, started talking about it. I was kind of like, "What are you talking about?" I actually like going to Target and not having to talk to anybody in some days when I check out. So I thought that that was a good use of AI. But to me, what really struck me was more so the use of it in a way that was taking from the humanities of writing. And I think there's beauty in making mistakes. I think there's beauty in learning and just submitting a really horrible paper that you have to look over again and again to finally have a beautiful finished product. And so that made me a little bit nervous about AI, not because I'm not against it, but I also think that ultimately if it's something that we are going to have to accept in our society, I think that there's also, it should come with some type of disclosure notice, right? It should come with some type of, well, there's this happening and then there's that happening. And so that has really changed the way that I teach or changed the way that I have approached it. And I will call on Professor Wright.
Good afternoon. My name is Ahmad Wright, Assistant Professor, English Department. Fall 2024 is when I felt the full force of AI enter my classroom when a student admitted that he had been working on his assignments up to that point using AI, and he got snitched out by some other classmates. And I later realized that the student had so much to say, but it was being truncated and shaped in a way that where he wasn't able to express his full potential because he was using shortcuts, using ChatGPT. And so I stopped the class, and we'll get into some of the things I did using AI as a model. But that's when I finally woke up and said I had to start incorporating some kind of AI guideline discussion in my classes.
All right. I guess by process of elimination, I'm up. My name's Craig Wynn, and I'm an associate professor of English over at the main campus. And my interest in AI was very gradual. And like Ingrid, I am also a little bit behind, a little bit toward the back of the pack when it comes to those kinds of trends. I was one of the last folks to get a smartphone, for instance, and the AI would have been the same principle would apply to AI, and it was a gradual interest that was happening in 2023, 2024, and the tipping point was in a class where I realized that a fair number of students were using AI to write proposals for a course. And at that point, I realized, okay, I really have to work with this. So I do have, there are some mixed feelings, but I do find that it is very helpful for students to use it as part of the writing process. And and as someone who writes myself, I also find it's very helpful for me to help generate ideas, structure, and get feedback. And as I'll talk about during the presentation, I'll show some strategies that my students and I currently use in the classroom.
So something that we found while we created this presentation and we were brainstorming and getting together and talking about AI was that ultimately the common thread was that it's important to kind of, talk about the elephant in the room, right? Bring it into reality and just, these these are students, they are going to use it. It is available for them. It is completely free. And so why not? And so I think something that we all have in common is I think we've moved past the mentality of like, let's just pretend it's not a thing, right? Because I think that will create a new can of worms. But I think it's also important to, if you are concerned about cheating, if you are concerned about the ethical implications, to then also, incorporate it into your class, right? Rather than it being like a boogeyman that's out there on Halloween streets, bring it into your classroom and provide an opportunity for them to use it in a more quote unquote supervised environment where you can model best practices or you can start to notice how they're using it and just be like, well, maybe that's not the right approach for it. And I think that connecting those two worlds of a nebulous use of AI and then exercises that will allow them to see, that their voice still matters, that their writing still matters, and that at the end of the day, AI is not going to be better than whatever it is that they have to say.
Dare to compare. And so what I did once this IGD 111 class, I found out that that student was using AI. I had the students create a paragraph they were writing in class, of course, and then I used that model to let them reflect on what they were writing. We had done an in-class peer review. I think I lost you guys in the Zoom, but an in-class, here we go, an in-class peer review. And I wanted them to reflect on what they were writing, what they were doing right, what they were doing wrong, to take steps to believe in their own ability to write, edit, and to just get that draft in. And then once they were finished, I created the AI prompt. I used Copilot to create a prompt to the same paragraph they were writing. And we just compared what they had versus what the prompt had. And there were some elements that the prompt did very well, right? And some things that the prompt didn't do as well, and that the students did a lot better. But the main thing is that I wanted the students to really feel comfortable and competent, confident in terms of what they were doing. Um, in the next slide, you see examples, all the same student, but different writing assignments. We have the student writing in class, in their own handwriting, in 30 minutes, creating a single paragraph in response to a certain prompt. Julie Cresswell about pandemic pounds is out of the New York Times, I believe. And after the students created this paragraph, again, I had an AI generated version of it, and we just went through it line by line, looking at what the AI version did pretty well and what the students did well or not well in certain places. So the process gave them kind of a model, right, as they compared their writing with this particular AI version. Low key, I guess, I was trying to let them know that, just by going to AI, you're not always going to get, the greatest, especially if you're using the free version and depending on, what kind of prompt you use. But you can use it to help generate an idea of where you want to go, or at least use it to make your draft a little bit stronger. But there's no need to use the AI output as your original. So I wanted to drive that home. In the last example, same student, different essay, and the student typed their assignment this time, and we compared typed paragraphs. So metacognition was a huge part of this exercise, getting them to reflect on their own process as they looked at an AI example to sort of guide them through areas where they were having trouble. And I believe Christian is next, or Professor Garcia is next. Okay. Thank you.
So I wanted to take a little bit to expand on my previous statement and something that has really shifted the way that I view AI. And it's mostly due to thinking about the social economic considerations and implications that come with the use of AI. I have, friends in different industries, and they're sharing with me how their coworkers are using AI and how they've had to, be like, now I have to use AI. And so I do think, especially more so with the community college population, a lot of our students, if you choose to not use AI, or if you choose not to show them how to improve their work with the use of AI, that's going to put them at a disadvantage when they do enter the workforce. And so for me, there is a very clear connection between, I would love to think that all of my students are in there because they love to read and they love to write. But at the end of the day, college, university, so on, degrees are part of a stepping stone for them to go on to other things. And I tell them that at the end of the day, you need to be competitive with our job, with the market. And so I do think that it's important to consider that, right? To give them an ability to work on those skills in our classroom. And I think I watched a good video the other day on LinkedIn, and they just mentioned, just assume all your students are using AI anyway, right? And I think shifting that mindset from like, well, no, they're not using it. They're not, no, instead of like, well, let's just, for the sake of argument, let's just assume everyone's using it. And I, as the instructor, I would much prefer to allow them that opportunity to use it in a particular context with particular activities that I can kind of control the outcome for. And so I think it's important to just remember, AI isn't really going anywhere. So throughout the semesters that I've been teaching, I'm also finding that learners are falling in a spectrum, right? There are some learners that are like, yeah, I use AI all the time. It makes my emails, I got a student the other day was like, yeah, it sends emails to my grandma. And I was like, oh, I wonder if grandma knows that you're not the one writing the emails. And then I have students that are like, well, I think that using AI is cheating, right? Even if I use it to proofread, right? And then I have other learners. I had one learner a couple of weeks ago that we did the exercise. She let us know, she's like, well, I just feel like I live under a rock, because everybody else was kind of commenting on their use of AI. And she was like, what is ChatGPT? And the rest of them were like, where have you been? So there is a very big spectrum. And I think that's also an important consideration when you are teaching, or when you are entering these spaces, because you will have, I think, we always get into these generalizations of because someone is young, that's what they're doing. But there's a lot of people that are young and have never heard of ChatGPT or not using ChatGPT, or they feel like they have to pay $15 to use ChatGPT, so they refuse to, use ChatGPT. So one of the activities, so ChatGPT is the one that I use the most, to be honest, with my learners. And so first I ask students to give me a paragraph on something, right? It could be either something we're discussing in the classroom. It could just be something that is of high interest to them, right? Something that I already know they're going to have a lot of things to say. And then they give me a paragraph. I just look at it. It's just kind of like a free write. And then in class, this is something that we talk about. I have to reiterate what a paragraph looks like. And I think that this is important to do maybe at the beginning of class as well, because at the beginning of class, I personally, as a professor, I'm not really sure, what the writing standards are for them. And so this is a great time for them to do it. So, sometimes, everyone has a lot of opinions about kids and toddlers. And so the question I gave them this term was, how do you feel about toddlers and screen time exposure, right? Do you feel like toddlers should be running around with an iPad, or do you feel like that should be something to be controlled? And so I had my students post their original discussion, right? The one that they wrote their thoughts in and everything. And then we go and transition into ChatGPT. And again, all of this is done during class time. And then I tell them, okay, go to ChatGPT and give them the same prompt I gave to you, give it to ChatGPT and just see what ChatGPT comes up with. Next slide, please. And so what happens is, everybody has this generic response. And I've done this a couple of different ways with the results. Sometimes if we're on Zoom, I'll have everybody copy and paste that paragraph into the chat. Sometimes I'll have them go to a separate discussion board and I'll have them post the paragraph that ChatGPT gave them. And then this past exercise, I had them just paste their ChatGPT version underneath their original version, right? And so there's just different ways to do it. But the question that I asked them was, what do you notice about all the AI generated responses? And I didn't lead the witness, I just landed it there for them to come up with their own conclusions. And so a lot of them automatically did the wow moment. And I feel like as instructors, especially writing instructors, that's something to really capitalize on, right? Because now I'm not the one telling you that ChatGPT is going to make you sound the same. They can see, we use the same prompt, and they start noticing, if everyone puts their response in the chat, they are going to start noticing, oh, wow, Professor Aguiar's response is almost exactly the same as Professor Wynn's response, Professor Wright's, and so they start noticing the patterns. And then I think when you take it a step further, and so I give them a reflection piece, and I gave them another assignment where they had to do a similar process. And I asked them, I want you to reflect on the difference between how you responded and then the difference between how ChatGPT responded. And so for me, that is very crucial, because I think, again, the thing that keeps coming up in the feedback is that they understand that this is changing my voice, right? A lot of them were like, well, this doesn't sound like me, this makes me sound different. Then one of my students was like, I sound too professional, I don't like it. I was like, well, that's kind of, the general tone of it is very different. And, again, I think it's a good way to also segue into teaching them about prompt guides, right? The difference between edit this, the difference between proofread this without changing the tone or content, or, hey, I just want you to proofread it for typos, because it will change your tone. And then on the screen, I have what to me is one of the strongest reflections, because I do believe that when you give opportunities for students to reflect, because I think a lot of the times they just want running through the assignments. And I think for them to really understand that ChatGPT is a tool, but if you rely on it, you're going to end up sounding exactly the same as 10 billion other people. And so something that one of my learners wrote that liked that ChatGPT made them sound logical and not over the place, that it was grammatically correct, and that it was revised. And then they said, I wish I had known how to use ChatGPT before in other assignments in a lot of my other classes. So that would have caught a lot of my grammatical errors and I probably would have gotten a higher grade. However, they did say ChatGPT, it wasn't personal, right? There were no personal stories. There was no input. In this case, there were a lot of my students have children of their own. And so they were able to insert, like, well, I don't do this to, my 5-year-old, 6-year-old. And that's not something that ChatGPT can do because it doesn't have that human element to create a story. Next. So I just wanted to leave you with some other activities to consider. I also were working on the tone of ChatGPT and like the fact that ChatGPT, maybe unlike your instructor, although I always try to give feedback in a nice way. The way that ChatGPT always gives feedback is like, oh, this is so great. Like you'll ask it, oh, what do you think about this? Oh, this is the best thing since Michelangelo. And then you give it to me and I'm like, well, maybe, perhaps not. And so I think it's also really great for researching. So if any of you have had a chance to look at the UDC library now has a whole button that says, the AI. And so AI will give a summary of the article. And so something that I really encourage you to do is to pick a short article, something that might not send them running for the hills, have them read that article in its entirety, compare the article with the summary of the article, because again, they start noticing, oh, well, I read the whole thing and I'm getting so much more out of reading it in its entirety than for ChatGPT to give me the summary, and the summary didn't include all these really cool parts that I picked up on. Oh, and this one I really like this one. Learners are using it to create citations and the citations are wrong. And so then they're like, wait, what do you mean it's wrong? And I was like, well, actually, APA is in a lot of different editions. I don't know what edition you're using. And so that makes them, they get upset because they think, well, what do you mean? The robot told me I'm okay. What are you talking about? And it's like, well, it's not accurate. It just, there's some kinks that they have to work out on. And so again, I think teaching them to use it as a tool, but not to be fully reliant on it, is a great opportunity. And it opens great conversations, I think, for students too.
Okay. All right. So with at the campus, the main campus, one of the things I like to do, because with creative writing, I teach a lot of students who enjoy writing. So one of the challenges with respect to that in technology is that a lot of students, they're very artsy, very creative. So a lot of them are very resistant to some of the technologies. And I've had a couple of students actually ask, "Do I really have to use this?" So that's probably how I might have actually been as a student. So I do sympathize. So what I might have them do is, okay, just write a paragraph on what you don't like about ChatGPT. And my thinking is eventually they're going to have to kind of succumb to it like I did in that respect. But what I do with this activity is they actually do students log into ChatGPT, and by this point, they've already gotten feedback from peers. Peer review is one of the best practices that we use when we teach writing. And I give them a prompt. I'm writing a memoir or a fiction piece for my class. Please give me the feedback on strengths and weaknesses. Do not rewrite it or provide corrections. And they copy and paste their piece into the search field, and they get the feedback, and they actually have to engage in some metacognition, where they ask, does ChatGPT give you similar feedback to what I've given you, to what your peers given you? And they have to think about whether the feedback does seem helpful, and it also engages them in some critical thinking. Do you disagree with any of the feedback from ChatGPT? And you can go to the next slide. So this is just a sample of this is just from one of my students in that particular class. In some particular cases, the ChatGPT does offer similar feedback that I had given on a draft, as well as their peers. But ChatGPT and AI tools, they don't always provide accurate feedback. Sometimes it misses things. So in this particular respect with point C, I disagree when it says provide a fuller picture of the emotional landscape during your grandmother's illness and passing. And in this particular case, the student is engaging in dialogue with the tools, so where it may offer good feedback, but the student isn't taking everything at face value. And I use it myself as a writer, and there are times when it'll give me feedback where I'm thinking, I don't think that's really going to work for the goals I'm trying to accomplish for this particular piece. So with that, the next thing is with grammar. As well. And this is the same issue that when I was going to school, our professors were always telling us don't rely entirely on spell check and Microsoft Word. And these are designed to help students utilize these tools in conjunction with proofreading skills. And so what I might do is I might give a paragraph that's rife with errors, and students will read it and they'll proofread it on their own for errors in grammar, punctuation, mechanics. So they'll come up with their own corrections, and then they'll copy and paste it into Grammarly, and they have to compare and contrast what errors Grammarly found versus what they were able to find, and they have to answer questions: what errors did you find that Grammarly couldn't, and what did you find? What did the tool find that you didn't? And a lot of the time, students do get different ranges of feedback from Grammarly, and I've actually had students say, "Wait a minute, my classmate it corrected the spelling here, but it didn't do that for me." So it's not always 100% reliable. So teaching that AI can be a good tool, but you do still have to lead. The metaphor, it's kind of like a dance, with like a tango, for instance. There's somebody leading, somebody following. You have to be the one that leads. The AI is just the assistant in that respect. So next slide, please. Thanks. All right, and citations as well. So with citations, kind of similar to what Professor Garcia was just talking about, where students they log into the tool, and they're given a prompt where they have to cite a book, and they have to actually compare it with what they see on Purdue OWL as well, which is how most of us taught citations prior to ChatGPT, and they're taught how to navigate Purdue OWL. There's that left-hand link that gives the different types of sources, and they actually have to compare it, and they actually have to examine the answers that it generates. Does it look similar or different? And I intentionally put the page number on it because in a APA or MLA citation with a book in the reference or a works cited page, you don't actually have to cite the page number. However, the tools don't know that, so it puts the page number at the end of it, and students will say, is there supposed to be a page number here? I don't see that on Purdue OWL." And with that, they see, okay, so that's why you have to cross-reference it with the tool, and that's why you have to lead in that respect. So. All right, and this is just one area where I had to work develop. So this actually happened very recently in my iGED 210 class, where students were submitting literature matrices, which an assignment that I developed pretty recently in response to AI tools, because I was having students write annotated bibliographies in that course, but the problem was that I had no idea if students were actually reading the piece. For all I know, the tools could have been generating the annotations for them. So what a literature What a literature matrix essentially does is it compels students to read the actual pieces and to look for quotes that could actually help them. And a couple of weeks ago, one student submitted hers early, so I thought I'd grade it. And I noticed that language sounded a little bit different than what she usually uses. So with respect to that, I Googled some of the sources and found out they didn't exist. And this had actually happened to me about a month earlier when I was doing research of my own, and I had asked them for sources, and I searched them and found out that those sources didn't exist. So I pulled the student aside, I asked them, and she was very contrite about it. She said, "Yeah, okay, I used ChatGPT," and I had to tell her, "Look, those aren't real sources. They actually don't. They're not real sources." So, but since was contrite, since she fessed up to it, and it was a few days before the actual due date, I said, "Okay, I'm going to pretend we didn't have this conversation. So go ahead and just redo it, but this time you have to do your own research." And then I made an announcement to the entire class. So just be sure you're doing your own research. So I told them about hallucinations, and when I teach the class in the spring, I'll likely have some type of an activity where students can find this out for themselves early on, rather than the hard way.
So I think Craig is pointing to a big challenge that kind of runs through everything that we're talking about here. We really need to build opportunities for students to have some of these learning experiences around AI within courses. And I know the LRD folks will have some thoughts on this too. We also need to scaffold this across all of our writing courses. So I'm going to talk to you about an IGED 210 course and how I've built in or how we use AI in that course, and specifically how I try to help students think about some of the affordances and limitations of AI. And this includes going beyond ChatGPT. So I heard a great talk a couple months ago from some colleagues at the Fashion Institute of Technology, and they did this huge campus-wide survey of their students, and they found out that most of their entering students only were using chat. They didn't really have any experience with anything else, but through in-class training, they got access to and they got familiar with all of these other apps that could help them, specific to fashion, writing, things like Perplexity and Claude as well. And on exiting, students were using a much wider variety of AI tools for different purposes. So I gave my students this semester the same survey, and sure enough, only one student reported using any tool other than chat, and that was Perplexity, and that was a student who had taken a previous course with me where I think Trisha and I introduced them to Perplexity. So there's a kind of limited exposure to some of the different AI tools and what they might be able to do differently. So I'm going to walk you through a workshop that will underscore, or that I use to underscore, some of the limitations that AI has, especially around rhetorical awareness and the tendency to hallucinate sources that Craig was talking about. So the first step, and I think this is really important, my strategy is brain first and then AI in everything, and that includes in-class activities. So we always start with students generating ideas, and I try to be really upfront and have a discussion early in the semester about how large language models work and how there's a risk of offloading all of our cognitive tasks onto them and essentially getting stupider over the course of time because we're not doing any of the smaller tasks that help us build up. So this is a small task that we always do together at the beginning of a workshop. We generate as a class a list of rhetorical moves that we're going to need to see in a proposal or in a piece of writing. What makes this assignment really good for this kind of workshop is the proposal, as many of us teach it in discovery writing, actually has multiple sections that each require different moves. So in this case, in this workshop, I tend to divide the class up into multiple groups, and each tackles a single section, and they have to really pay attention to what the specific moves are. So you see here in the background and history section, students are talking about providing rhetorical context. They also talk about using narrative later on and using fewer references, particularly when going over just generally known historical information. Whereas in the mini literature review, they need to cite much more often. They have to cite constantly and they have to be engaging in discussions. You get the idea. We're thinking really at the micro level. What's this set of 3 or 4 paragraphs going to be doing? Um, so then there's a little misdirection. While they're doing this, I move around the class, and invariably, some students say, well, oh, okay, well, at this point, let's get some AI help. And we get a wonderful learning moment. It's very predictable. It happened the last time I did this when I went over to the group working specifically on the research plan section, which is really reflection and planning. It's not something you need to use AI to help you with. Sure enough, students were using, in this case, Gemini, though I'd learned from my survey that they had no idea that they were using Gemini, that that's what that AI overview is, and they were using that to put together steps for a research plan that had nothing to do with the research plan that I had asked them to do and that they were also looking at. So the students were struggling to connect. You see the little image down there. The idea that they were going to be answering 2 questions. What are the major conclusions of your research so far? And what do you need to know? With the fact that Gemini was telling them, you got to define your research, you got to create a methodology, things that we either had already done or that you wouldn't do in primary research. So this gave us an opportunity as a class, particularly when this group went to share this, to say, well, actually, all of that would earn you an F on this section. That's not what we're talking about. And so we're able to work through why Gemini would do that to you. And of course, it's because Gemini is trying to give you what it thinks you want, which is a research plan for primary research. Whereas what I'm asking you to do on this particular assignment is to generate really just a reflection on where you are midway into a multi-cycle secondary research project. So then after that, after we've cleared the air, we've seen that, and we've got our list together, I like to move into just a traditional workshop. So, we go section by section. We use that list of moves that we want to see, and we tag the moves together, and we elicit and note down student feedback. Very traditional step. And then we enhance it with AI. If there's time, I'll admit sometimes this gets cut off and we have to move this to a discussion or move it to a separate class. But what I like to then have students do is take the feedback that they've provided as a class, look through it, process it, and then turn to AI, the AI tool of their choice. I try to push them to use, Claude in this or something other than what they're used to with chat, and ask them and show them, as some of my colleagues have talked about, a specific prompt for feedback. How would you go about prompting for feedback? What would you do to get this? And then we look at the responses students get. And there's a variety of ways to do this based on how AI savvy you feel your students are. If I have a fairly AI savvy class, if I see that they're using it and using it fairly well, then I just kind of leave this open-ended. With a 100 level, with the first semester writing class, I tend to tell students, take that list that you made and plug that into AI and ask it for feedback on those things. So if you're going to get feedback, use the rhetorical knowledge that you have and your contextual knowledge to enhance the feedback. And that can underscore for students how they can use AI to supplement what they're already doing and how they can make up for that weakness in AI, which is unless you give it context, it really has no sense whatsoever of a specific rhetorical context. If things are left open-ended, we also get to talk about what Ingrid was talking about, that wonderful AI feedback. So when we put that same paper that you saw the students' classmates had absolutely torn up with ideas, when I just dropped that into chat and said, hey, what do you think of this? Is this good? As you can see, chat said, wow, wonderful. I cut out all of the really saccharine sucking up that chat does, but it said absolutely A content, A minus clarity, A tone, whereas the class had essentially come to the verdict that the student need to take several sections back to the drawing board, needed to cut up paragraphs, and in effect wasn't doing the task at all in the very important research review section. So that's a good learning moment for students in terms of the limitations. In the interest of full disclosure, is not perfect. Neither the teaching process is perfect, nor student knowledge of AI. So even after that process, 3 students did still submit the same assignment with sources that did not exist at all. It couldn't be found from journals that didn't exist, from authors who in one case have been dead for 20 years, but we're doing new work. So they all, they all struggled. What I think this scaffolded approach does for us, though, having had that discussion, having had that opportunity to learn, I can now tell that student, well, you get a zero, and here's why you get a zero, and you don't get a second chance to rewrite this because I've showed you what the issue is going to be. And so we're able to fairly and ethically enforce some consequences when students are misusing this, which is really hard to do. If we haven't taught students about this, then it's entirely plausible that a student might not understand that this is happening. But once we do teach them and teach them how to avoid this and how to work with AI, then we are able much more effectively to say, as I had to, well, for this section of the assignment, you get an F because this isn't the research plan we talked about. You are certainly not going to be recruiting participants at MedStar Washington Hospital because you will be in deep trouble if you attempt to go recruit some of your patients for this, particularly since you are not a nurse and don't work at MedStar Hospital.
And something
So I
else
think,
to add to Christian's slide also was that, nowadays with technology being the way it is, when students do choose to still make up references and all this other stuff, if you give me a link that doesn't work, I can see that it doesn't work because when I click on the link, it either sends me to a DOI not found, and there's just this giant yellow icon that says it doesn't exist, or I click on it and it's a completely different article. And so I always emphasize to my learners, when you write a paper, you have to have sources to back up what you're saying. And so how could you have possibly, written a 3-page, 4-page paper when you're telling me that the citation is from, Professor Wright, a story, and then I go and it's, Professor Wynn's entire biography. Like, it doesn't even make sense. And I think that that's even an added layer of complexity in the fact that they are trusting something and they're not even looking at, like, can you at least look at this before you submit it? Will it kill you to just click the link just to see, if it exists or not? And they, again, I think some of them are learning, oh, maybe I should check my work before I submit it. But I think that there is a misconception that everything that comes from AI is foolproof and that it's correct and that it's accurate. And that is not the case.
So I think we want to try to use the 15 minutes or so that we have left for some open discussion. I haven't been monitoring the chat. I don't know if Ahmad or Ingrid or Kayla or anyone has, but we'd love to open it up to discussion.
Well, I just wanted to mention one thing. In my comparative examples, and I know all of us have done a little bit of the same thing in a different way, that the main thing is, of course, for students to really feel confident in what they are writing so that they feel comfortable enough to use the AI model in whatever form. That's the goal. I did put something in the chat that may be a little counterintuitive to what I just said, because we've all been using, at least I've been using, the sort of simple free versions. I do wonder, with more sophisticated versions or the pay versions, if all the work we're doing would be a little bit harder to sort of discern. And if any of the librarians could jump in there. Jacob, is that true? If they have access to the more premium models, then our work would be sort of doubled?
No, not necessarily. I think the
Okay,
more premium
good to know.
models, they still have the same sort of reliance on these, generic writing patterns, and they still have the same chance of hallucinating or giving you the wrong information. I think
Okay.
the paid models, what they can do that what some of the free versions can't do is that they can do more advanced real-time searching, so they can sort of like search Google on your behalf better than some of the free versions can. But when it comes to the actual like writing and the quality of the information, it seems to be on par between free versions and paid versions.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, which is something that has just also been on my mind too, that like we were talking a little bit about some of the like socioeconomic impacts of using or not using AI. And this has also been on my mind too, that like a lot of these AI tools start off as free models, and then eventually they merge into a state where you now have to be a paid subscriber to use them.
Mhm.
And so I think I hope that this won't be the case, but I can imagine a future where, people that have the means to purchase these AI tools are at more of
Mhm.
advantage than people that
Yeah.
don't. And so I think the more that we can demonstrate, the true value of, human human thought and creativity, the more emphasis we can place on, how those are skills that AI can't replace.
All right. Thank you.
And I think something too, I always like telling my students about all the crazy stories I live, but one of my coworkers used an advanced premium version of AI and they created like the best PowerPoint I've ever seen in my entire life. And I sent her a message like, how did you do this? Like, because I like my PowerPoints. And so I was very jealous. I was like, what? How'd you do this? She was like, oh yeah, it took me like 5 minutes to do. And I was like, what do you mean it took you 5 minutes? Meanwhile, I'm over here like, let me move the title. No, I have to. And so I was like, okay, well, how did you do it? And so she sent me the link to the AI that she used and all this other stuff. And so I had a presentation the next day and the schedule was crazy. And so I tried to use it. And that thing had the audacity to tell me, oh, well, you've used up your data. And I was like, but I haven't even used it at all. Like, what do you mean I've used up my data? And so I told that to my students because I was like, I know that all of you love to procrastinate and I love that all of you love to do college assignments at like 11 p.m. and this is due in an hour. And so I told them, if I didn't have the skills already to do a PowerPoint and the design template and all that other stuff, if I was in that situation where I had to submit something and I was relying on AI, and AI, for whatever reason, the internet goes out, the light goes out, apparently my data, which I never even had data, what are you going to do? And so my question to them is always, because there's been so much talk about interviews, that interviews are being conducted virtually, and that employers are
Mm.
concerned that people are using AI to answer questions and then they're just reading it off screen. And so I think we are going to, I don't know, I
Didn't
think
think
we
about
are
that.
going to have a combination of going back to the blue book where you had to write your finals in the blue book that you had to give out. And I do think it's important to let them know that at the end of the day, like Professor Aguiar said, like your brain comes first. You have to be self-reliant. You have to be able to maneuver in the world with the brain that you have, right? And not depend 100% on AI, because you never know when AI apparently doesn't like you and lies and says that you ran out of data.
Yeah, and also I'm very big into low stakes writing exercises. So when students come into my classroom, they're writing little bits every day, and a lot of these exercises measure critical thinking. And one thing I have moved away from, particularly in my creative writing class, is asking students questions about about technical elements, say in a poem, for instance, and asking, "What do you think about this?" And it compels students to actually use their own thinking and not rely on that. So it starts to help students practice those skills. And I tell students it's a lot like a muscle. You have to work it out regularly in order for it to be effective. And the better thinker you are, the more helpful AI can actually be for you because it helps you with the prompting and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to talk with students about these kind of cognitive risks. So I'm sure many of us do something where we talk with students about how to read scholarly literature, things like that. Lately, I've been, and it updates just about every semester, but I've been trying to use the scholarly, most recently review, previously much smaller experimental studies that say something or that attempt to understand how AI is impacting cognition. And of course, nothing's entirely definite. And we often use the analogy in class. This is like, social media 15 years ago, people started to wonder, whoa, could this possibly be bad for us? And now, we're seeing, to Ingrid's point, oh yeah, this is a disastrous thing to give to a 5-year-old, but we didn't know. And so, or maybe we did kind of know, but we didn't necessarily want to believe it. So, we've got 10, maybe 15 years of 5-year-olds being given iPhones that we'll now have to contend with forever. And I think when sharing the uncertainty of our knowledge about this tool with students, it really does resonate. It truly does. Students want to understand. Most of our students really do want to learn. And so when we give them the opportunity to engage a little bit with what the risks might be, and we're honest about our uncertainty about this tool, and our uncertainty in some cases, I know Kayla dropped some math terms in the chat that none of us English people understand. I won't speak for the librarians, but at least from the English perspective, we don't fully understand how this works. And I don't believe the open AIs of the world have been very transparent about how they've built their models because they're trying to win market share. So OpenAI can have that $1 trillion IPO and rank it some.
And there's some comments in the chat if you want me to read them. Ingrid said, this is in relation to when we were talking about assignments and encouraging metacognition and critical thinking. She said, I've started rethinking my syllabus not to make it more complicated, but how can I increase critical thinking and verbal skills and presentation skills, which are connected to writing? I said something along the lines of like just making assignments more open-ended. I think that's key, and I will try to mitigate some of like the cheating that comes with with a lot of AI. From a math perspective, I remember before ChatGPT, we had Mathway, and students used to just you know, put procedural questions into Mathway to generate a response, which, as a math teacher, I didn't really care so much as for the answer, but I cared more about the process. So like creating like those assignments in which you have to, it's not just, okay, what is the answer to x plus 2 equals 4? Like why is that the answer? How do you apply that to real world scenarios, things of that nature? Something more open-ended, more critical thinking. That will take more critical thinking. I think that's key.
All right. So I think if we have no other comments, no other points you want to discuss, I'll, on behalf of my colleagues, I guess, thank you all for joining us today for this discussion. I think there's at least a couple uh praxis focused AI discussions coming up, including I think one from our colleagues in nursing. So, I hope we'll all get back together for more discussions, not just of AI conceptually, but really concretely how we're using this, how we're teaching students to use this. And thanks to Kayla and the Cal team for hosting these kinds of things constantly so that we can all, share our practice.
Thank you so much. This was a great discussion, and I really appreciate you all for sharing your insight.